Coming up in this episode, we're going to talk about how point-and-click adventure games made a resurgence in the 2010s, thanks in part to the interest in a Kickstarter campaign for Tim Schafer's Double Fine Adventure. But Double Fine Productions wasn't the only one making adventure games, and we have folks like AGD Interactive, Amanita Designs, Wadjet Eye Games, Fully Ramblematic, and others to thank for keeping the genre going. We're going to talk about all of them and many more today. I'm Sean Jordan, and I am your Great Game Guide. Get ready for a survey of many of the great adventure games you may have played, may have heard of, or may have missed. If you ask an adventure game fan who the greatest adventure game creators of all time are, you're very likely to hear a handful of names including Roberta Williams, Jane Jensen, Al Lowe, Josh Mandel, the two guys from Andromeda, Mark Crow and Scott Murphy, Lori and Corey Cole, Muriel Tremy, Steve Moretsky, Brian Moriarty, Dave Grossman, and Ron Gilbert. But if you ask the average gamer, you're likely to hear another name adventure gamers will also be likely to mention, Tim Schafer. And this is really interesting because Tim Schafer is one of the few adventure game creators who's not only associated with some of the greatest adventure games of the 1990s, namely Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, Day of the Tentacle, and Full Throttle, as well as the incredible Grim Fandango, but also a game developer who's managed to stay current in his role as the founder and studio head at Double Fine Productions, a game developer and publisher he founded over 25 years ago that's now owned by Xbox Game Studios. Now, Double Fine is not an adventure game company, and aside from a few notable titles like the action-adventure series Psychonauts and Ron Gilbert's 2013 action platformer puzzler The Cave, they're mostly known for wildly experimental ideas that tend to be classified as indie games due to their scope, size, and low prices. Their two most recent games, 2025's Keeper and 2026's Kiln, are both tremendously original. Keeper has you playing as a lighthouse walking around a desolate 3D world, and Kiln is a 3D arena brawling game where you create your own pottery and smash other players. Double Fine is also known for the heavy metal album cover themed action brawler and strategy game Brutal Legend, the trick-or-treating RPG series known as Costume Quest, the fascinating alternate reality mobile trench warfare game Iron Brigade, and the lovely and completely original Matryoshka doll 3D action adventure Stacking. And though Tim Schafer played more of a studio advisor role than a creator role for most of these titles, it's clear that one of the reasons he's so well known is because he's transcended what a game developer is. He's become something of a father figure in gaming, using his foundation as one of the great game creators of the 1990s to bring out the creativity in his younger teams and really champion making video games feel fresh and new. All of this context might help explain why it was Double Fine Productions who helped to bring point-and-click adventure gaming back into the mainstream, and they accomplished it with a Kickstarter campaign in 2012 that was initially supposed to result in a small digital indie game known as the Double Fine Adventure, but which was so popular and successful in concept that it was eventually released as a two-part adventure game in 2014 and 2015 called Broken Age, starring Elijah Wood, Masasa Moyo, Pendleton Ward, Will Wheaton, Jack Black, Richard Horvitz, Jennifer Hale, Nick Jameson, and Nikki Rapp, among many other talented voice actors. We know more about the development of Broken Age than probably any other adventure game ever created because part of the Kickstarter pitch to backers was that a documentary film studio called Two Player Productions would chronicle the entire development cycle. This makes a little more sense when you understand that the documentary Indie Game the Movie debuted in 2012, and game developers Edmund McMillan, Tommy Refenes, Phil Fish, and Jonathan Blow became minor celebrities because of it, though Phil Fish was probably harmed more than helped by the exposure when a corner of the internet gaming community turned on him. Tim Schafer clearly felt it was a good idea to give his own development team a shot at fame, and Two Player Productions wound up releasing a 12.5-hour documentary series you can watch in its entirety on YouTube to see, warts and all, how the game was actually made. And I should be clear in saying that Broken Age was not deserving of this amount of scrutiny because it's really a very average adventure game that was quite disappointing to many of the game's backers, myself included. It's not a game you'll see referenced much today, despite its extremely high profile a decade ago, and that's primarily because its longer-lasting influence is more on what it did for adventure gaming and the Kickstarter ecosystem, bringing in over 60,000 new users and establishing a very engaged community willing to back other well-known adventure game creators who were bringing back classic genres or franchises, than what it accomplished as a game itself. The premise of Broken Age is that you play as two teenagers who are living very different lives, but who share a similar ambition to break free of the fates that have been assigned to them. One of them is Shay Volta, the sole human on an AI-powered starship that has two personalities. The sun-shaped Mom system, which is active during the ship's daytime hours and which smothers Shay like a helicopter parent, and the moon-shaped Dad system, which is active during the ship's nighttime hours and who's distant and doesn't provide much guidance. Mom has made the place so pitifully safe that everything's made of yarn, and Shay's activities are always situations where he succeeds and is treated like a hero and given ice cream as a reward. But he is also really bored. And so Shay gets excited when he discovers a stowaway named Merrick that looks like a wolf and who convinces him that his AI parents have been lying to him. Instead of the Superman-like journey he believes he's on to find a new world after his old one was destroyed, he's actually aboard a ship capable of saving cute, oppressed space aliens in need of his help if he acts outside the supervision of the computer. And yet, it becomes clear to Shay that Merrick is also not trustworthy when Shay's repeated attempts to save a particular alien creature result in Merrick growing increasingly desperate for him to stop, and the ship is damaged in the process. The other person is Bella Tartine, who lives in a place called the Badlands, where she's being prepared, along with other 14-year-old girls, to be a sacrifice for the vicious giant brain-like creature Mog Chothra, who will destroy the town's dam if it's not appeased with a steady supply of maidens. Bella survives her fate and resolves to kill Mog Chothra, and part of her quest involves meeting an adult man character named Alex, who looks a lot like Shay and who's living on a crashed starship that looks a lot like Shay's. He pledges to help her by blasting the beast with his ship's laser. So, you'd expect that we're going to discover that these two characters' stories take place in different times and that Alex is Shay, but nope. The twist ending to Act 1 is when Shay emerges from the wreckage of Mog Chothra and meets Bella on the beach, and as she takes a swing at him, she falls into Shay's computer-controlled life while he is stuck outside in the Badlands. This is all, quite frankly, the setup for a pretty good story, and that's why Act 2 is so disappointing, because it absolutely does not stick the landing. The story becomes a confusing mess of hastily explained lore and complex conspiracies that honestly don't make a ton of sense. And remember, this is coming from a guy who really loves The Longest Journey's astoundingly complex storyline. The game's also just not that funny, especially in the second act, and that's a letdown given that Tim Schafer's games tend to be known for having a number of laugh-out-loud moments. There's also the jarring difficulty spike. While Act 1 is very heavy on story with fairly light and infrequent puzzles, Act 2 is far heavier on problem-solving and feels like a lot of dead ends happen more often. Double Fine was clearly responding to user feedback while making the game, and, well, let's just say their original vision got compromised along the way as a result. What is great about Broken Age is the flat-painted artwork, animated in that very awkward 2D style so common in the 2000s and 2010s where the character's body parts just sort of rotate and stretch rather than looking hand-drawn. And at the time, it really was a bold choice given that a lot of people associated classic adventure games with low-resolution pixel art. The voice cast, as I mentioned, is spectacular, and the music by former LucasArts house composer Peter McConnell is also quite good. And honestly, with a decade of distance between playing the game and talking about it now, I do wonder if Broken Age is more deserving of a critical reevaluation today. It's not a bad game by any means, and absent the hype, it might even be a game that rises above expectations for new players rather than failing to meet them. Reissued in a director's cut edition that smooths out the puzzles and which introduces all the backstory a little more gradually, it might actually find new life as a beloved adventure game. But absent that, let's just acknowledge Broken Age for what it turned out to be, a game that reestablished the market for point-and-click adventure games. And that turned out to be good news indeed for the indie game publishers who were already making point-and-click adventure games when the Double Fine Adventure Kickstarter campaign took off, because it allowed developers like Amanita Designs and Wadjet Eye Games to find the larger audience they deserved. So back in 2010, an indie game developer named Jeff Rosen from a studio called Wolfire Games launched a 2-week campaign for a pay-what-you-want bundle that offered DRM-free copies across multiple platforms and which offered to donate some of its proceeds to charity. The Humble Indie Bundle included 6 games: World of Goo, Aquaria, Gish, Lugaroo HD, Penumbra Overture, and, added midway through the campaign, Amanita Designs' Samaros 2. The Humble Indie Bundle was so successful that it led to many more bundles and eventually a dedicated storefront and a game development studio and publishing arm called Humble Games. While Wolfire sold the company to Ziff Davis in 2017 and it's now a part of the IGN Entertainment brand, Humble Bundle is still very much around today. and there's no question that it played a huge role in helping to popularize indie games on the PC by using its limited time deals to raise the profile of a number of titles. Amanita Design was one of the earlier benefactors, but Double Fine Productions also jumped on board and released several of its own bundles through Humble Bundle over the early years, including prototype games their team had hacked together. And the Adventure Game Company, Daedalic Entertainment, Wadjet Eye Games, King Art Games, and even Revolution Software were among the many other adventure game developers who gradually included their games in various early Humble Bundles, as well as on competitors like Indie Gala, Indie Royale, and Groupies. I mention this because while it's fairly common knowledge today that Steam was the dominant marketplace for growth of digital gaming on PC during the early 2010s, what often gets lost in the shuffle is the importance of these gaming bundles for adding large swaths of indie games to gamers' digital libraries and giving them the ability to try off-the-beaten-path games at their leisure. Mobile platforms certainly helped as well, and there are few genres better suited to touchscreens than point-and-click adventure games. But I contend that had it not been for deeply discounted digital gaming bundles allowing gamers to grab half a dozen games or more for just a few bucks, many of the games we're about to talk about wouldn't have gained as much attention as they received. And this has nothing to do with their quality, because the Amanita Design point-and-click adventures are some of the best and most beautiful games in the genre, certainly worthy of playing today and definitely worth the small price you'll pay for them. Some are even available for free. This Czech Republic studio was started in 2003 by indie game developer Jacob Dvorsky following the success of his browser-based point-and-click adventure game Samarost, and it specialized in short experiences like it for the next several years, releasing a combination of advertorial games, educational games, and other browser-based titles, including Samarost 2. In 2009, Amanita Design released their first full-length game, Machinarium, a beautifully illustrated game with no dialogue that instead uses graphical thought bubbles above characters' heads to communicate their needs. While the game's more along the lines of a Neverhood or Professor Layton-style puzzler than a typical point-and-click adventure game, there is a storyline where you must pick your robot Joseph up off the scrap heap and stop some evil robots from blowing up a tall building. The storyline is often told through little animated vignettes that appear in the thought bubbles, and it's really up to you, as the player, to pay attention to what's going on if you want to grasp the entire plot. But that's really optional. The strength of Machinarium is its presentation and its puzzle solving, and it's a beautifully designed experience. One of the most interesting aspects of the game is that it includes several mini-games to play, including a walkthrough for each of the puzzles that you can access by playing a brief shoot-'em-up style mini-game where you steer your key into a lock, opening a book with graphical depictions of the actions you need to take. Some of the puzzles are tricky enough that they really require you to think through your actions, and the built-in walkthrough is helpful if you don't know what you're doing wrong or if you can't figure out where to begin. Amanita Design was still a small independent publisher when Machinarium first shipped, self-financed by its team of 7 who'd worked on it for 3 years. Unfortunately, it was one of those games that was, at least according to Amanita, heavily pirated due to being released on PC DRM free. In 2010, Amanita Design offered the game for $5 instead of its normal $20 in a Pirates Amnesty promotion that did grab some headlines and prompted gaming blogs and sites to remind the public that, hey, Machinarium was actually a really great game, well worth paying $5 for. This is what life was like before Steam sales, and both Steam and Amanita's eventual acceptance into the PlayStation Network's digital storefront helped to further boost the game's availability and visibility. Amanita's next game was Botanicula, released in 2012, and this time featuring a world of plants, fungi, and insects with 5 playable characters working together to save their home tree's final seed from being devoured by balls of long-legged blackness that are threatening not just the tree, but all of the creatures who live on its branches. It's not only a gorgeous-looking game, but also an amazing-sounding one, thanks to a soundtrack by the Czech alt-rock band DVA, which offers a strong sense of ambiance to set the game's chipper yet adventurous mood. Oh, and by the way, the band appears in the game as a couple of caterpillars playing a concert before they slip into cocoons. Botanicula is so unique, it's hard to compare it to anything specific, and at times it reminds me of Loco Roco, or Pikmin, or Pixel Junk Eden, or Knit Underground, or Sound Shapes, which were all fairly contemporary to it in one form or another, but there are also moments that are so unlike anything else I've ever played that I can only really recommend playing it for yourself to see what all the fuss is about. It's a joyful experience that's definitely surreal, and just a tad scary for the little ones near the end, but which is also so beautiful and wonderful, it's a game I'd recommend to almost anyone. Amanita's next game was Samaros 3, this time offering a full-length experience for the character known as the Gnome. In the first two games, Gnome explores a realm of space filled with tiny planets made up of natural objects like tree bark and rock formations and roots, as well as discarded mechanical objects, most notably a rocket ship called the Polo Conserva, which is made from a real-life can of what would have contained actual hot dogs in 1970s Czechoslovakia. I love stuff like that. In the third game, the stakes are a little bit higher as the gnome discovers a book revealing a sort of cosmic horror story about a space octopus who flew around the universe eating planets until a group of monks built a superpowered robot with a sword who chopped the octopus up into pieces and saved the galaxy. But these monks each used their magical flutes to control the robot, and wouldn't you know it, one of the monks went rogue with his flute and stole the other three, one of which wound up landing outside the gnome's house and providing the inciting event for this game as the gnome discovers he has to explore other worlds and eventually stop the evil monk and return the heroic robot to service. Like all of the Amanita Design games, Samaros 3 has absolutely gorgeous graphics and tells its story through presentation rather than through speech. While the imagery is focused on natural environments, more like Botanicula, the machinery from Machinarium definitely influences some of the game's visual design as well. Even so, it's definitely the most surreal game they've made to date, and it's so gorgeous that it feels like a work of art in motion. Don't miss it. You can play all three Samaros games in just a few hours, and they are well worth your time. Amanita's more recent games include 2018's minigame compilation Chuckle, its card-based 2019 adventure game Pilgrims, its 2020 horror puzzle platformer Creaks, its nightmarish and fittingly named 2021 adventure game Happy Game, and its upcoming storybook-style adventure game Phonopolis, which comes out later this month. Now look, I am not doing any of these games any justice by simply describing them this way. You should play all of them if you're even remotely interested in what they have to offer, because every single game Amanita Designs has ever made is filled with great ideas and creative presentation that you rarely see in other games, and since each of them is also fairly short, they never overstay their welcome and always leave you wanting more. I think I can safely say the same for Wadjet Eye Games, a developer and publisher founded by Dave Gilbert in 2006. Now, as I mentioned before, Dave is not related to the famed adventure game creator Ron Gilbert, but he is a truly prolific and talented adventure game designer in his own right, creating the Blackwell Legacy series, Unavowed, Emerald City Confidential, Old Skies, and the extremely interesting game that launched his career, The Shiva, an adventure game that he originally submitted to the 5th anniversary of the monthly Adventure Game Studio contest and won with. Prior to The Shiva, Dave Gilbert had created several small freeware adventure games between 2001 and 2004, including The Repossessor, Bestowers of Eternity Part 1, Two of a Kind, The Postman Only Dies Once, Purity of the Surf, and A Better Mousetrap. But The Shiva was the first one he decided to release in a commercial format after seeing its reception, and Dave Gilbert went all out, adding in voice acting, outtakes, developers' commentary, extra puzzles, and improved graphics. If you play it today, you'll more than likely be playing the 2013 re-release known as the Kosher Edition that improves the graphics further and adds some new music, but whatever version you play, The Shiva is unlike any adventure game you've ever experienced for a very simple reason. You play as a Jewish rabbi investigating a murder. Now, if you're not familiar with Judaism, a Shiva is a mandated period of mourning after a death which lasts 7 days after the person is buried. As Rabbi Stone, a man who is deeply questioning his faith and values, you are pulled into the investigation of a former synagogue member named Jack, who died leaving you a large sum of money, but with whom you've also had a bad falling out with in the past due to Jack's marriage to a woman from India named Rajshri. You have to clear your name and solve the crime, using the Shiva to visit Rajshri and begin unspooling a thread that leads to a corrupt rabbi, a dead accountant, and a mafia loan shark who's running an investment scam. One of the most notable things about the game is the dialogue system, which sometimes lets you choose the tone of your response, and other times lets you complete sentences in a manner that may change another character's reactions and indicate your morality. There are times where you have to disarm people with rabbinical lines of questioning, and there's also a system for holding a rabbinical debate with your adversary Rabbi Zelig during the game's climactic battle, in which you can throw a punch or ask questions about morality. Given that the Shiva can be completed in a couple of hours, it's an easy recommendation for adventure game fans. It's quite engaging and has many of the hallmarks of other Wadjet Eye games, like being set in New York City, offering an ethnically diverse cast of characters, asking deep questions about death, morality, and spirituality, integrating puzzles into your investigation, and offering highly intelligent and thought-provoking writing. There are also multiple endings which allow you to decide just how deep Rabbi Stone's crisis of faith should go. Does he abandon his principles, give in to his temptations, or find a way to fight back the cynicism and stick to his beliefs? All three endings are valid, though only one of them is remotely happy. Dave Gilbert's next game explored some similar themes, though through different lenses. The Blackwell Legacy came out in 2006 and was the first entirely commercial Wadjet Eye Games release, repurposed from Gilbert's never-continued Bestowers of Eternity storyline, but also developing into a much larger story. It also served as the foundation for a series that I highly recommend playing all the way through. The Blackwell Legacy begins with a woman named Rosangela Blackwell, or Rosa if you prefer, who's reeling from the death of her Aunt Lauren, Rosa's adoptive guardian after her parents died in a car accident. The game opens on the Queensboro Bridge in Manhattan, where Rosa scatters her aunt's ashes into the river, and we soon learn Lauren and Rosa's grandmother both had mental breakdowns and exhibited some sort of psychosis about seeing and speaking to a person named Joey. Lauren was a chain smoker, by the way, so it's a nice detail that you get to scatter her ashes, but more on that in a moment. Rosa is plagued by migraine headaches, but she also has to file a story for the newspaper she works for, the Village Eye, to report on a suicide at New York University. This causes her to awaken her latent spirit medium powers, which were the source of her headaches, but which also introduce her to Joey Malone, a wandering spirit who serves as a guide to her family and assists them in helping departed ghosts lingering in our world to move on to their next existence in the afterlife. Rosa and Joey must investigate a ghost hanging about Washington Square who's connected to the student suicide, and this leads to a broader story about three girls who accidentally summoned a spirit called the Deacon with their Ouija board and who have been driven mad by his haunting them. Rosa and Joey have to find a way to not only stop the Deacon, but save the only one of the girls who's still alive from being driven to suicide herself. Rosa decides to take on the mantle of being a spirit medium, and the next several games starring her involve multiple cases in which she and Joey have to help spirits move on while they face some other powerful antagonists working against them. But before those, Wadjet Eye Games released a 2007 prequel called Blackwell Unbound that told the story from Aunt Lauren's point of view when she herself was a young medium in the 1970s. Besides getting to watch Lauren smoke several packs of cigarettes in the game, players are also introduced to the villainous medium known as the Countess and her connections to the Blackwell family. This helps to provide some added context and detail for the following games, and quite honestly, results in one of my favorite chapters in the series as Joey and Lauren explore New York in the 70s and even interact with a real person, New Yorker writer Joseph Mitchell, whose famous case of decades of writer's block plays a major role in the game's story. But the three games that follow Blackwell Unbound, there's 2009's The Blackwell Convergence, 2011's The Blackwell Deception, and 2014's The Blackwell Epiphany, are all very interesting games in their own right, as Rosa has to contend with her exhaustion from working as a spirit medium, the trauma she's facing in seeing so many gruesome deaths, and the very real danger posed by the ghost of the Countess, a malicious psychic predator named Gavin, and a mysterious character named Madeline, who has a deep connection to the Blackwell lineage. The Blackwell games are all a little different in how they play and reflect Wadjet Eye Games' growing sophistication with the AGS engine and its extensions. This is also a series that's been very close to its fan base. When the Blackwell Deception changed its art style dramatically to give its characters comic book style portraits instead of painted ones, the outcry among fans was loud enough that Dave Gilbert hired a different artist to redo them. Each of the games also includes a developer's commentary and outtakes, which add a lot of value to replaying them, but a really notable aspect of these games is also the puzzle design, which is almost always something that arises organically from the events of the story and rarely forces you, as the player, to have to use lateral thinking or twisted logic to figure out how to progress. Characters will make statements that serve as hints about what to do next, and each game's case-by-case design prevents you from wandering too far outside the boundaries of knowing what you need to do next, though you'll sometimes be juggling more than one case at a time. But what I enjoy most about the Blackwell series is that each of the games feels like it has a purpose beyond just offering dialogue trees and puzzles. From the moment you meet Rosa, the series has a world weariness to it that suggests that the job she's about to take on is never-ending and soul-devouring. And all you can really do as the player is help Rosa and Joey through their quests and hope that this service you're providing the spirits of New York City is going to have a happy ending. These are not happy feel-good games. They're dark and philosophical and unafraid to examine the line between life and death, legacy and obscurity, epiphany and deception. They're all really good stuff, and I recommend playing every one of them in order so you get the whole experience. Another Wadjet Eye Games release by Dave Gilbert that came out during the Blackwell series is Emerald City Confidential, a story set in the world of L. Frank Baum's Oz novels featuring a film noir-style story where you play as Petra, the only private eye in Emerald City. For whatever reason, this game is perhaps the most underrated of all of Dave Gilbert's adventures, but it's quite good, featuring an easy but moderately lengthy experience with a great storyline and a cartoonish aesthetic that's sort of like a combination of Adult Swim and Scooby-Doo. Tonally, I'd compare it more to the Telltale Games adventure since it's based on an existing property and isn't afraid to go for a joke by introducing an occasionally goofy character, farcical situation, or fun little piece of dialogue or description, but as with most of Dave Gilbert's games, the strength is in the writing and characterization, and this one's really good. I think the main reason it's not as well known is because it was published and marketed by Play First, a casual game developer best known for Diner Dash that's now owned by Electronic Arts. More recently, Dave Gilbert has released 2018's Unavowed and 2025's Old Skies, both of which I highly recommend. Unavowed takes a cue from the Blackwell games and once again involves the supernatural, but this time, you play as a character who was possessed by a demon who made you do unspeakable things until a group of magical heroes called the Unavowed come to your rescue and exorcise the demon. Your job is to join their ranks and help them undo the damage the demon caused, recruiting new members along the way as you try to solve the mystery of what your possessed former self was actually up to. To say too much is to spoil a really great story that you can customize RPG party style by selecting which characters you want to experience it, and I'm really impressed at how well the game adjusts your choices of which characters to bring along. It's truly reminiscent of Maniac Mansion in that way and encourages replayability, but as I've mentioned before in previous episodes, this game goes all out in trying to portray epic action that really shows the limitations of what two-dimensional point-and-click adventure gaming can do, and for all of its ambition, it's probably the Wadjet Eye Games release most befitting of a full 3D action remake down the road. Or maybe a live-action online streaming miniseries. This game really does have a neat story that could be expanded upon. Old Skies is a game I've recommended before on previous episodes, and it's a time-traveling adventure that once again shows off Dave Gilbert's strength as a game designer and writer by coming up with a fairly new concept for the effects of time travel and yet another compelling, world-weary meditation on what it all means to not only be a part of it, but to break free from it. It's right up there with Steins Gate in terms of its emotional stakes and interesting ideas, and while it has many great moments, I don't think there are any more memorable than walking around the World Trade Center in New York City on September 10th, 2001, knowing that in the morning, everything is going to change. But Wadjet Eye Games has also published quite a few adventure games not created by Dave Gilbert, and not only are many of them worth your time, but some will also introduce you to some of the best adventure game creators out there, as well as some of the best stories in modern gaming. In 2011, a developer named Joshua Nernberger released a game called Gemini Rue through Wadjet Eye Games, and though it's kind of fallen off the radar in recent years, it's a game I highly recommend tracking down and playing. The game takes place in space in the 23rd century and has a really neat cyberpunk aesthetic that's sort of reminiscent of Rise of the Dragon by way of Blade Runner and Total Recall, with a retired assassin character who's kind of like John Wick, at least for half the game. The other half involves a different character that takes place in a futuristic prison where all of the inmates wear white jumpsuits and get stuck behind laser walls, very reminiscent of the prison scenes in the Star Wars series Andor. One difference, however, is that you're not stuck working on machinery in a grueling gamified task, but instead memory wiped of your criminal past and being given a chance to rehabilitate yourself through daily testing tasks, preparing you for a final exam. But of course, the game has a big curveball to throw at you as you discover how these two characters are related, and Gemini Rue absolutely rewards you with a gripping story as that twist unfolds. But you know what's most amazing about Gemini Rue? Dave Gilbert has said that the game was made when Joshua Nernberger was just 19, and that it was also the publisher's first breakthrough success story. Nernberger went on to a career working in web development and even doing some work for NASA, and has no desire to return to games, so if he only had one good game in him, this was apparently it. Resonance came out in 2012 and was developed by Vince 12 under his studio 12 Games. That's the Roman numeral 12, by the way. And it's both a murder mystery thriller and a science fiction story about a coming apocalypse brought on by electron particle splitting technology called Resonance. The game involves 4 different characters who are all caught up in the death of Professor Javier Morales, the particle physicist who created the technology and who was wrapped up in a deeper conspiracy with a powerful shadowy organization called the 11 Foundation and a supercomputer called the Antivorta. One of the most interesting things about this game is how you use the different characters' capabilities in tandem to solve puzzles, but there's a big twist that shakes things up later on in the game and causes you to view the character's skills a bit differently. Resonance also has a neat aesthetic that's somewhere between a traditional point-and-click pixel art game and a comic book, thanks to cartoon bubbles being used to showcase speech and some imaginative cutscenes and backgrounds. It's a neat adventure that makes me wish Vince 12 had a few more games to his credit, though he, like many of the creators who have published through Wadjet Eye Games, is often credited for his help advising other adventure game developers or testing their games. The 2012 adventure Primordia was created by Mark Yahalam's Wormwood Studios, who'd also go on to make the 2021 game Strangeland. Primordia definitely falls into the realm of science fiction and it's not easy to explain its plot. Think of it like a combination of Fallout, Full Throttle, and Beneath the Steel Sky because it's a post-apocalyptic game where mankind is long dead. You play as the gravel-voiced android Horatio Nullbit version 5, and you have a sarcastic robot companion named Crispin Horatio Built version 1. Your first task after having a power core stolen by a robot called Scraper is to rebuild an airship called the Unique, but when that proves more difficult than you expected, you wind up searching the nearby wastelands for parts and have conversations with various robots, often talking about humanism and the gospel of man, which is Horatio's reinterpreted take on the human Bible. As you and Crispin explore the area, you run into several different groups of robots, some of whom need or want your help, and one of whom accuses you of being its ancient enemy, Horus. In the city of Metropole, Horatio is also restricted from sharing the gospel of man quite literally by having it stripped from his circuitry. The game's storyline goes quite a bit deeper as you begin to discover that the robots in the area have had their memories manipulated, that various AI programs are locked into a political battle, and that the city is in danger of being infected by a virus called Thanatos, to which Horatio has a mysterious connection. Primordia is an extremely intelligent game that's particularly notable for how much autonomy it gives you as a player. There are different ways to solve some of the puzzles, and the game offers multiple endings that can be modified by whether or not 2 companions make it to the ending with you. Be sure to play this one with the sound turned up, too. The music and voice acting are just superb. Strangeland is a very different affair, like Darkseed, Planescape Torment, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and Sanitarium, to tell a bizarre metaphysical story about a character named the Stranger who's trapped in a carnival-like realm where he cannot die, nor can a blonde-haired woman he sees who appears to be trapped there with him. I am not going to even attempt to describe this game. It is absolutely messed up and tells one of the darkest psychological stories I've ever seen in an adventure game, complete with tarot cards and Norse mythology and clowns and crows and cosmic horrors and giant crabs and disembodied talking heads and body horror and crazy cicadas that make inspirational speeches about life. And unlike Sanitarium, which constantly messes with you but ultimately does give you an actual villain to defeat, this game's 4 endings take things in a very different direction as you battle a creature called the Dark Thing. I don't recommend Strangeland for those who aren't into twisted horror type stories, but it's a very well made adventure game that's visually impressive and which has the familiar Wadjet Eye Games voice actor Abe Goldfarb playing the role of the Stranger as well as a number of other characters. You'll have to play the game though to see why. A Golden Wake came out in 2014 as the first full-length commercial game from Francisco Gonzalez, the founder of Grundislav Games. Gonzalez made a name for himself in the AGS and freeware community for his 8-part Ben Jordan series, which ran between 2004 and 2012 and followed his growth as a game developer. The premise of A Golden Wake is that you're a real estate developer in the 1920s named Alfie Banks who heads to Miami, Florida to participate in the land grab in Coral Gables during a time where spectators believe that the land might grow into a major city. It's a modest-sized city of about 40,000 people today, notable for its Mediterranean style and strict zoning laws, as well as being home to the University of Miami. In the game, it's still undeveloped coastal land that has all the potential Alfie and his fellow speculators can imagine, but this also involves doing some underhanded things, like conning people out of their homes with inspections or working with flim-flam men, aviators, gangsters, and the Miami Men's Club as Alfie goes through a rise and fall that tracks along with the boom and bust of the Roaring '20s and heads into the Prohibition era. There's hot jazz music and people doing the Charleston, of course, but there's also the question of what it means to build a legacy in a place where your success can be wrecked by hurricanes, a cratering economy, and unpopular, oppressive laws. I'll give you a hint. The game's title is a foreshadowing of where things are going for Alfie in the end. It's a really interesting game that's both well written and historically based. It's also filled with beautiful backgrounds that evoke the Art Deco style and Gilded Age trappings, and it even has what TV censors used to refer to as adult situations. It's definitely an intelligent and original game, but for whatever reason, some players seem to find it dull. Their loss. Grundislav Games went on to release 2 more adventures that are both set in the same universe, but which were not published by Wadjet Eye Games this time. Both of them are really good and should definitely be on your radar. Francisco Gonzalez is an excellent and ambitious adventure game designer who will spend years meticulously working on these projects so they can integrate player choices made throughout the entire game. The first is 2018's Lamplight City, a 19th century steampunk detective story set in an alternate history where the United States is instead a colonial nation called Vespuccia that's part of the British Commonwealth. Much like A Golden Wake, this is a great-looking adventure with some really pretty backgrounds, but it often breaks away into what I can only call talking head sequences where 2 character portraits enter into a dialogue over a black background. This places a lot of the burden of the game on the story, and thankfully it is a good one. The setting of New Britannia is like a combination of New Orleans and industrial-era London, and the intrigue develops over the cases as investigator Miles Fordham finds himself on the trail of a serial murderer named the Justice Killer who only kills men and who leaves an Easter lily at the site of each murder. Miles also seems to be suffering from schizophrenia and is off his meds, leading him to drink heavily and self-medicate to suppress the voice of his dead partner, Bill Legere, who taunts him throughout the game. An interesting aspect of this game is that over the course of the 5 cases you solve, you can follow false leads and actually come up with the wrong conclusions, accusing innocent people or finding yourself unable to resolve cases. The story will keep going even if you mess up, but it is impacted by your lack of competence. Early in the game, there's a throwaway line from Bill where he mentions visiting his sister Harley out west. Surprisingly, this is the impetus for the sort of sequel to Lamplight City, a 2025 game called Rosewater, that features the journalist Harley Legere arriving in the town the game's named after and getting pulled into the orbit of a Wild West show performer named Gentleman Jake, who's about to embark on a treasure hunt. Harley joins him, his trick-shooting partner Danny, a revolutionary from New Spain named Phil, a native named Nadine, and a steam wagon driver named Lola on a trip that ultimately takes them from Rosewater to the west coast city of El Presidio, where the companions finally find that the treasure they've been tracking is far more than they bargained for. And the fact that I'm offering that description might tell you that the destination isn't really what makes Rosewater special. It's very much the journey. And much like the excellent 2024 JRPG Metaphor Refantasio, the best moments in the game come from the road trip sections where you're getting to know your companions better and dealing with various vignettes that pop up along your trek. Every one of these characters is well crafted and has 3 dimensions of personality to explore as you get deeper into their backstories and motivations, and the many different paths and endings you can experience in each playthrough mean that there's plenty of reason to dive back in for another run if you want to see how things could have happened differently. But before Lamplight City, Francisco Gonzalez teamed up with artist Ben Chandler to work on the Wadjet Eye Games release Shardlight, another interesting adventure game, this time set in a future post-apocalyptic world where shards of glowing green uranium are used to provide lighting in the game's ruined environment. You play as Amy Wellard, an inhabitant of this world who's suffering from a terminal disease called green lung, and you have to make moral choices regarding your fellow sufferers and how you want to respond to the conspiracy going on in the game's storyline, which involves a group called the Aristocracy who dress in British uniforms with powdered wigs and respirator masks resembling white face paint with prominent blush and beauty marks. Oh, and there's a Plague Doctor-style Grim Reaper who's also running around, though he's not a supernatural character, and there is a logical explanation for it. As fascinating as the setup is, Shardlight is often criticized for feeling underdeveloped, and because of this, it's definitely a deep cut as Wadjet Eye Games adventures go. On the plus side, Gonzalez and Chandler released 2 freeware mini-adventures set in the same storyline that you can play if you find the game intriguing. Check the show notes for a link to them. The year before Shardlight debuted, Wadjet Eye Games published a different adventure game from developer James Dearden at Technocrat Games. This title, Techno Babylon, is a fairly unique adventure game because it involves one of the main characters jumping in and out of a cyberspace-like network called the Trance, and offers an interesting Blade Runner-style dystopian world that involves not just computer technology, but also biotechnology wetware that creates some interesting new wrinkles on the cyberpunk genre. You alternate between two sets of characters, a net addict named Lava Sesame, who lives as cheaply as she can in reality so she can spend most of her time in the trance, and Dr. Charles Regis, an agent of the police organization Cell who's on the trail of a terrorist known as the Mindjacker. While you think the story is going to set up a typical police procedural sort of mystery, what happens instead is Regis gets blackmailed into helping the Mindjacker commit more terrorist acts in order to protect the lives of some embryos Regis and his late wife Vishka had frozen in hopes of starting a family. The story has a lot of twists and turns, and is notable for avoiding character tropes and really trying to do things differently. One character is unapologetically transgender. Another is a covered Muslim woman who's actually trying to prevent more bombings from occurring. There are substantial discussions about the intersection of bioethics and artificial intelligence, and flashbacks where scientists are involved in love triangles. There are puzzles where you have to alter robotic personalities by infusing one from a waifu-style chef machine, and a detective sequence where you have to make sure a powerful, connected murderer is accused in front of all of the other suspects, dead to rights with no wiggle room. There's also a surprising sisterhood that impacts much of the story's final act. It's a really neat experience overall, and certainly one of the most impressive adventure games of the modern era. The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow is a more recent title from Wadjet Eye Games, developed by a trio of developers named Sean Aitchison, John Inch, and Laurie M.H. at Cloak and Dagger Games, and released in 2022. You play as Thomasina Bateman, an antiquarian in Victorian London who's invited out to the English countryside village of Bewley to investigate a mysterious barrow. Her contact never shows up, and the villagers are suspicious of her, in part because she's an eccentric outsider with a high level of education, and also because she insists on wearing trousers. Over time, some of the villagers do warm up to her, but it's very much not to their credit, because Thomasina is ultimately being manipulated by two characters who want to unleash something from Hobbs Barrow. How she's connected, what's actually imprisoned there, and whether or not she can stop them form the backbone of a very engaging and interesting horror story that grows more and more unsettling as you play it, and which is very much in the vein of H.P. Lovecraft. And the old-school pixel art graphics, atmospheric effects, British voice acting, and jarringly sentimental flashbacks showing Thomasina and her doting father add quite a bit to the experience overall. Make sure you don't miss this game. It's absolutely fantastic. You may know Ben Yahtzee Croshaw today for his novels, his zero punctuation reviews, or his more contemporary, fully ramblomatic YouTube channel, but before he was an acerbic critic or a novelist, he was making adventure games under the Fully Ramblomatic Games banner, and from 2000 to 2007 he released a bunch of them, from the Rob Blank trilogy to Lunchtime of the Damned, to The Trials of Odysseus Kent, to Adventures in the Galaxy of Fantabulous Wonderment, to 1213, to his most famous quadrilogy, sometimes known as the John Defoe tetralogy or the Trilby tetralogy, but more commonly known as the Chizo mythos. And you might be expecting these games to be funny based on Yahtzee's other works, but they're actually quite serious horror stories that sprawled out into a deep and compelling mythology. The first of these games, 5 Days a Stranger, stars a gentleman cat burglar named Trilby who is trying to rob the Defoe Manor out in the British countryside in the year 1993, but winds up trapped inside with several other people along with a terrifying demon. And of course, the other people start dying Mystery House style until you can find out how to stop it. The game ends with Trilby burning the mansion down. The demon's name is Chizo, and it has a strong connection to the mansion that transcends space and time. This is explained in the later games, 7 Days a Skeptic, Trilby's Notes, and 6 Days a Sacrifice, in which Trilby and the Defoe mansion continue to be connected. But 7 Days a Skeptic takes place in the year 2328 on a spaceship, and 6 Days a Sacrifice takes place in the year 2189 in a far future version of the UK. Trilby's Notes, by contrast, returns to the 1990s and has Trilby explore a hotel that shifts back and forth from the real world into a dark, Silent Hill-style alternative world, as well as to witness some sequences that take place in different periods of time. It's also a departure from the first two games because it involves using a text parser rather than a point-and-click mechanics. All 4 of these games are available as freeware on the Fully Ramblomatic site, and they're absolutely worth your time. If you need a reason to check them out, I even found a 2003 review on AdventureGamers.com from Dave Gilbert himself recommending the first game. Another indie adventure game studio that was active in the early 2000s was AGD Interactive, also known as Tierra, because they recreated several Sierra Online adventure games in the AGS engine to give them a similar look and feel to King's Quest V's VGA edition. Along with the new versions of King's Quest 1 through 3, AGD also released a VGA edition of Quest for Glory 2 Trial by Fire, even allowing players to import and export their save files to maintain continuity with the Sierra games. These games are all still available as freeware and were definitely part of the fabric of the fan-driven movement to keep adventure gaming alive once Sierra folded. AGD, by the way, means Anonymous Game Developer, and the two developers behind it, Brittany K. Brimhall and Christopher T. Warren, formed a commercial development studio called Himalaya Studios that has released two adventure games, the Wild West-themed Al-Mo and the Lost Dutchman's Mine, and the Quest for Glory-style adventure RPG Mage's Initiation Reign of the Elements. While neither is a game I would highly recommend, I'm very grateful to the creators for the Sierra remakes, and I definitely do recommend supporting them. Peter Simoons' studio Crystal Shard is another developer that took some inspiration from Quest for Glory with the 2013 freeware game Heroine's Quest: The Herald of Ragnarok, which takes place in the Norse mythological tradition during Fimbulwinter. Similarly to Quest for Glory, you create a character and select a class that gives you certain abilities mainly used for combat, but occasionally also used for problem solving. While you play as a female character this time around, that has little bearing on the plot. It's more of a way to ensure the game is legally distinctive from its inspiration, but it's truly a wonderful adventure game, and that it's a full-length game of a commercial level of quality and completely free should be enough to make you want to play it. Crystal Shard has released many other games in different genres as well, but its 2017 commercial adventure game A Tale of Two Kingdoms deserves a lot more attention than it's received. And since it's set in the realm of Celtic mythology and has a lot of fairy tale inspirations included, you can bet it has the feel of a King's Quest adventure, but with far more opportunities for the player's choices to shape the story and various endings. Clifftop Games is a development studio from Sweden that's most famous for its 2016 game Kathy Rain, A Detective is Born, which takes liberal inspiration from Twin Peaks and features a motorcycle riding punk and journalism student who's trying to learn more about her grandfather after his mysterious death. The story gets very weird and supernatural the longer it goes, and Kathy is haunted by her own traumatic childhood as well as the abortion she had as a teenager, giving this game a surprising amount of pathos. Now, if you're going to play this one, go ahead and just enjoy the superior 2021 Kathy Rain Director's Cut, which smooths out some of the puzzle logic and is just a general improvement in almost every way. The 2025 sequel, Kathy Rain 2 Soothsayer, is also quite good, and Clifftop's other standalone adventure, Whispers of a Machine, is a decent cyberpunk detective story that really deserves a larger audience. I want to mention two other adventure game developers from the modern era that haven't really fit neatly into any of our other discussions. The first is Fireproof Games, makers of the series known as The Room, a well-regarded puzzle escape room series in the style of The Seventh Guest, but without the clunky narrative. There are 4 games in the main mobile series, which came out between 2012 and 2018, with a consistently high level of quality, and also 2020's The Room VR, A Dark Matter, which is absolutely a great way to cap off the series. Because these games were originally built for the iPad and iPhone, they involve a lot of 3D mechanical object spinning and manipulating, but the puzzles are exquisite and really require you to think and experiment. As the series goes on, there's more of an exploration element to the gameplay, but the story is never the main attraction. It just provides a creepy background theme to justify the main puzzles you have to solve. All of these games are worth your time. Don't let the fact that they're originally mobile games stop you from trying them. The other developer I want to mention is Lucas Pope, creator of 2013's Papers, Please and 2018's Return of the Obra Dinn. While Papers, Please is as much a simulation as an adventure game, its structure is really about making choices, solving puzzles, and interacting with other characters, albeit in an oppressive regime where you are constantly forced to make moral choices that may or may not involve leaving your family behind while you defect to another country. Return of the Obra Dinn, on the other hand, is a detective game where you must piece together the narrative of what happened to a merchant vessel that disappeared for 5 years before finally showing back up as a ghost ship. You use a pocket watch called the Memento Mortem to explore the moment of death for each crew member you discover, and you have to solve an enormous logic puzzle that not only fleshes out an absolutely crazy and very involved storyline, but which also involves uncovering the identity of 60 different souls who were aboard the ship. It's a remarkable game and made even more distinctive by the fact that it approximates the monochrome look of early Macintosh games, though the gameplay itself is in 3D. There are so many other adventure games I could discuss, but I will mention a few more in our wrap-up episode next week. But for now, let's close out with one more surprising revival to the adventure game genre: full-motion video games. In 2015, the British game developer Sam Barlow launched an indie game called Her Story that brought back something adventure and mystery games had largely left behind: full motion video. But the clever idea of Her Story was to treat the video clips as found footage in a badly organized database and to force the player to watch videos to uncover new search terms to learn more about the story of Hannah Smith through 271 clips of police videos. The game's story involves the murder of Hannah's husband, for which Hannah at first seems to have an alibi, but as the player investigates the story, they learn that Hannah has a look-alike named Eve who was also involved in not just this situation, but her entire life. The game also ends with a twist I won't mention, other than to say that it completely recontextualizes everything that you've watched up to that point. It's a brilliant game and rightfully considered a classic. Barlow's later games, 2019's Telling Lies and 2022's Immortality, are similar in structure and are also well regarded. While I don't feel either has quite as strong of a bite as Her Story, there's no denying that they are excellent games in their own right. Another interesting FMV adventure is All Seeing Eye Games' 2017 release, Press X to Not Die, which is basically a campy B-movie style adventure with a goofy zombie storyline and lots of jokey moments that's capped off with a clown fight in a parking garage. Your choices impact some of the game's storyline branches, including what sort of clown you fight at the end. Is it a birthday clown or a juggalo? It's quite reminiscent of old Laserdisc-style animated games in terms of its limitations and its overall length, but it's still a fun one, worth the $3 it normally costs to play it. But the most prolific maker of full-motion modern adventure games has got to be Wales Interactive, an indie game studio from the UK that started to get some attention in 2016 for its neon-colored Tron Legacy-style first-person adventure Soul Axiom, before taking things in a very different direction with the FMV adventure The Bunker the same year. The Bunker was actually developed by Splendy Games and tells the story of a 30-something man who grew up in a fallout shelter following a nuclear attack on England in 1986. And as he attempts to fix the air filtration system, he goofs up and has to flee the radiation he's accidentally unleashed, bringing back repressed memories of what happened to the other survivors who used to reside in the bunker along with him and his mother. The story's interesting and the acting is great, but the game is basically just the length of a feature film with cable TV production values and fairly limited interactivity. Even so, The Bunker was popular enough to get Wales Interactive to seek out other FMV games to publish, leading to the 2017 release of Control Movies' Late Shift, the 2018 release of Deveki Studios' The Shapeshifting Detective, and starting in 2020, the release of a huge number of FMV adventures including The Complex, 5 Dates, 10 Dates, I Saw Black Clouds, Nightbook, Bloodshore, Who Pressed Mute on Uncle Marcus, Mia and the Dragon Princess, The Isle Tide Hotel, and Dead Reset. None of these games is particularly well regarded, but they are definitely there for those who can't get enough of FMV gaming. And with that said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but we're still not quite done with our look at adventure gaming in the modern era. In our next episode, we're going to wrap things up and talk about where things are going from here for the adventure gaming genre. And don't worry, I still have a few more hard to categorize games to talk about that we've missed, and we're going to get to them. And get ready, because 2 weeks from now, we're moving on to platform games. We'll talk about how games like Space Panic, Pitfall, Popeye, Jungle King, Burger Time, Elevator Action, Mr. Deuce Castle, Pac-Man, Mario Bros., and Donkey Kong help to cement a style of gameplay that Super Mario Bros. Took off with and which we've never looked back from. We'll talk about computer games like Jumpman, Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy, and Hard Hat Mac, and we'll also talk about why the genre struggled in the transition to 3D. It's going to be a fun series, and I can't wait to get started! If you enjoy this show, you can read this series every week on my Substack at greatestgames.substack.com, where you'll also find brand new articles on other great games you've probably never played. And you're always welcome to talk with me on Bluesky. I'm Sean Jordan, I am your Great Game Guide, and I'll be back next week with more to explore. Before I let you go every week, I close out the show with a game I want you to try that's a little bit off the beaten path. This isn't sponsored content, and I don't have any financial stake in anything I recommend. These are games that I think are really good, but don't have as much exposure to some of the more popular ones. This week, I'm recommending Sword of the Sea, a 2025 release from Giant Squid that is absolutely one of the most gorgeous games I have ever played. The game's similar to Abzu or Journey in that you're a character in a surreal world that responds to your progression through it, but the idea this time is that you're surfing around on a magical sword and restoring life to a world that's grown devoid of it. In the opening area, you do this by surfing around desert dunes and searching for energy portals and shrines to restore water back to a ruined desert, as well as fish that start floating in the sky, adding a visual cue to where you need to go next, and also just adding a lot more beauty to the world in general. The game's visuals are wonderful enough, but the Grammy-winning music by Austin Wintory elevates what's already great into an experience that's just magical. The chill vibes of surfing around on your sword, searching for ways to progress, and never really worrying about nailing specific tricks or obtaining any sort of score makes Sword of the Sea a game you largely play for the relaxing design it has to offer. And while there is a story that's told through wordless interactions with another character, where the game really excels best is when it's just content to surprise you with new ideas and fun twists on the mechanics that you've already mastered. The only complaint I have about Sword of the Sea is that it's too darn short. The 2 to 3 hours of gameplay it provides are magical, but I was surprised when it was over and really wish there was more. But I can always play it again and I won't be sorry to. Like any great piece of art, there's plenty there to enjoy the second or third time around. The Great Game Guide is a podcast written by me, Sean Jordan, and I also wrote the theme music. This is all 100% human-created content. I don't use AI for any part of my production. This episode is copyright 2026 by me, Sean J. Jordan, and you can find more details in the show notes and on my website at greatestgames.substack.com. And credit where it's due. Any games, artwork, sources, or additional music are the property of their respective owners, used under fair use guidelines and also noted in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know on Substack, Bluesky, or with a nice review. But I'd appreciate it even more if you'd share it with a like-minded friend. Thanks for listening!